Hi, everybody. It's Jay, and I am back in the booth with you for another sneak peek video preview for this week's new release here on Say with Jay. Our new release this week is The Cowboy's Mistletoe Christmas. It's book 10 in Jessie Gussman's original Sweetwater Ranch Western Cowboy romance series, and I have to say, it's a little bit special. Once this is released this coming Friday, the entire collection of Jessie Gussman audiobooks will be available here on Say with Jay. That's right, if Jessie wrote it and I recorded it, it'll be here for you guys to enjoy. Now, if you've been following how we do our releases here, you'll know that we alternate. One Friday, we will release a brand new audiobook like Jessie's current Flyboys of Sweetbriar Ranch series, and then we'll alternate that with a previously released audiobook. Well, since there are no more previously released audiobooks to release here, that means changes are coming to how we're going to do releases here on Say with Jay. We'll have more about that coming in the next couple of weeks, so keep your eyes and ears open. Okay. Now, as always, I'll have more about the Cowboy's Mistletoe Christmas and a preview for you in just a bit. But first, I wanted to share something that happened this past week. I've been working on Jessie's latest Flyboys of Sweetbriar Ranch title, and without spoiling anything, there is a scene that Jessie's written that I have to voice a married couple with an accent. Now, that's nothing new. I've done plenty of accents before, and hopefully with enough skill that I didn't offend anybody. That's kind of the bar that I start from. Anyway, for whatever reason, I just could not get my head and my voice around this particular accent. I tried, and every time sounded worse than the one before. So I finally just said, okay, moving on, and I sent what I had done for that chapter with the other chapters I had recorded that day to Jessie, like I always do, but I sent an apology in advance because this chapter stinks, and promised that over the weekend I would practice it more and I would get it fixed before the audiobook is ready to release. Well, those of you who know Jessie, or know anything about Jessie, honestly, can probably guess what happened next. Sure enough, she sent me the most wonderfully kind and supportive email, which, for the record, she sends me wonderfully kind and supportive emails whether I send her chapters that stink or not. Just wanted to say that. But, Jessie expressed that it sounded fine to her and that would be plenty good. But if I wanted, she was willing to rewrite the chapter, take it out altogether, whatever was necessary for me to feel comfortable about it. That's how wonderful it is to work with Jessie, by the way. I just wanted to put in that little plug. But by the time I saw this response the next day, I'd had a good night's sleep, so I already kind of walked myself off the ledge a little bit and felt better about my plan to practice and fix it. The chapter still stunk to high heaven, don't get me wrong, it did. But I felt better about it. Now, Jessie mentioned in the email, though, in the course of discussing all of this, that she had written, or in the book she's writing now, a conversation between the hero and heroine about the message of 2 Corinthians chapter 12. That's where Paul is telling the Corinthians about the thorn in his flesh that he's asked God to remove. Now, he wasn't referring to a literal thorn. He said it was put there to keep him from being conceited, but he still asked the Lord to remove it. And the Lord declined, and that's when Jesus told him that my grace is sufficient for you, for my power becomes perfect in weakness. Jessie was raising the point that who knows what God can do with something that we don't consider perfect. And who knows, maybe there's somebody that needed to see me at less than my best. Or maybe this was something for my benefit and gain. We don't know yet, but I do know this. When God's plan had Jessie write that chapter with that couple, with that accent, God knew that I would have this challenge. And it's at times like these that we should lean into God and lean into His sufficient grace, His grace that is sufficient. And to quote Paul, "For when I am weak, then I am strong." Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about the Cowboys' Mistletoe Christmas. This is the story of Angela Davis, who we first met as the object of Clay Preacher Striker's long-distance pen pal romance or romantic affection in the Cowboys' Secret Romance. Angela was not an extremely nice person in that story. Well, if you've been following the series, you know that Angela had a rough go from that point on, and she's now in Sweetwater working as a waitress at the diner. It's also the story of one of the few remaining original members of Clay Striker's Harvest Crew, Mack. Mack is back home in Oklahoma when he learns that he's gained custody of his sister's 2 little girls. Now, because he's promised Clay that he would be in Sweetwater, he has no choice but to take his nieces with him. Now, Mack knows Angela, of course, and knows her history, and he doesn't really trust her, and the feeling's mutual. But Mack needs help with his nieces, and Angela needs help planning the Christmas festival for Sweetwater. Can these two overcome their mutual distrust and work together? Well, you know you're going to have to come back this Friday to find out, but I hope you will, and here's a sample of the story for you. Hope you listen to it, hope you enjoy it, and then come back this Friday for the full release here on Say with Jay. 2 days later, Angela worked the breakfast and lunch shift so she could have the afternoon off. Mack took off early too, and they took the girls and drove into Rockerton, doing their shopping before dark, then heading to the small amusement park on the south side of town. They drove through an amazing display of lights before parking to walk along the path through the park, where there were more lights along with hot chocolate, caroling, and the largest toy train display Mack had ever seen. The girls were enraptured, and they stood for a while, Angela holding Ashley and Mack holding Holly. They hadn't talked much, and their small amount of conversation had been stilted and uncomfortable since whatever had happened between them that last evening with the pie. Maybe it was the magic of the evening or the wonder of the girls, but the awkwardness between them eventually faded away. Honestly, Mack wasn't sure what had happened with the pie, whether he'd offended her or scared her or what. Maybe he should have asked. But maybe he didn't want to know. He couldn't be attracted to Angela. Or, more likely, yes, he could. He just knew she might likely be using him. After all, he knew she needed someone to help her with the festival. He'd already volunteered, and she'd been spending a lot of time with his nieces, so he felt like he owed her. But maybe she wanted to make sure he was still in if his sister showed up. He didn't know, and he was tired of thinking about it. Anytime he was with her, he had a good time. Why couldn't that be all that mattered? Probably because, ever since the pie episode, he'd gone from enjoying her company to wanting to kiss her. Not smart, mister. A couple with small children pushed in beside Angela, and she shifted closer to him. He had a little space on his other side, but he didn't move, enjoying her pumpkin and spice scent, loving looking down on her shiny blonde hair that came out from under her warm beanie and fell smoothly over her coat and down her shoulders. The temptation to touch it, to slide his fingers over it and see if it was as soft as it looked, was strong and took him completely by surprise. He tightened his hold on Holly but didn't shift away. This is amazing. I could stand here and watch this for a really long time. How do they coordinate the trains so they don't hit each other? Angela's face lifted up to his, her eyes bright, her cheeks rosy from the cold. I have no idea. He could take a few guesses, but his mind wasn't really thinking as he looked down at her. His eyes shifted to her lips, and it took him more seconds than he wanted to admit before he could tear his gaze away and look out over the trains. His breath felt shaky, and his heart raced like he'd been running. He couldn't feel like this with Angela. He knew that. His brain, at least, knew that. Apparently, there were other parts of him that hadn't gotten that memo. Someone bumped him in the back, and he shifted into Angela. Sorry, he murmured. His hand, without taking direction from his brain, came up and landed on her back. He realized at that moment they probably looked like every other couple with children standing and looking at the trains. Like a couple. Like they were a couple. His eyes went back to Angela, where they wanted to be, and he stared at the top of her head, wondering. Could he trust her? Could he let this be more? Although, after her reaction with the pie, he was fairly certain she was fighting just as hard as he was. Or maybe she was pretending. Maybe he should have a talk with Clay. Or maybe he should just talk with the lady herself. Holly lay her head down on his shoulder. He chuckled. I think I've got a tired one. Angela looked up with a smile. Me too. Maybe some hot chocolate on the way back? I'd love that. I can handle the cold, but the wind blows through you. Hot chocolate will help. He didn't move his hand from the small of her back as they turned and started down the path. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.